Hey fam, this is Necro Naruto. Today's story is gonna blow your mind. What if Naruto lost inside for Tsukiyomi for 10,000 years? The came through God of Shadow Monarch. While one day passes in real, show some love with a like and subscribe. Here we go. Chapter 1. The mercy that broke the bridge over the Kanabi ravine was narrow enough that only two men could stand shoulder to shoulder on it, which was exactly why Kisame Hoshigaki chose to fight there. Jiraiya's toad summons could not flank him in a corridor of stone with a 100-foot drop on either side. Samehada scraped a groove into the bridge rail as he dragged it free of its wrapping, and the sound carried up through the mist like something waking. Naruto smelled wet rock and old blood before he saw either man move. "Stay behind me," Jiraiya said, not looking back. Naruto did not stay behind him. He had never once managed that in his life, and this was not the day he learned to. Kisame's first swing took the front 3 feet of the bridge with it. Jiraiya rode the collapse down into a defensive stance on the remaining span, hands already blurring through a sign. Naruto came off the crumbling edge in a leap that put him directly in Kisame's shadow. Kunai reversed, aiming for the tendon behind the knee because Iruka had once told him big men fall the same as small men if you cut the right rope. Samehada turned before the blade landed. It always did. The sword had a hunger of its own and it recognized chakra, the way a dog recognizes meat, and it wanted Naruto's. "Not yet," Kisame said, almost gentle, and kicked him off the bridge instead of killing him. Naruto hit the ravine wall, found a handhold with the raw animal instinct that 11 years of falling had drilled into him, and did not fall. Below, the river was a pale ribbon threading through granite. Above, Sakura's voice cracked across the gorge, thin with distance, and was something under the surface of it that wasn't quite panic yet. "Naruto!" He did not answer her. He was already climbing. Itachi Uchiha waited on the far bank where the mist thinned, hands folded into his sleeves, watching the fight the way a man watches weather he is already accounted for. Kisame's job was noise. His own job required silence and proximity, and he had both now, because Naruto Uzumaki had just crested the ravine wall directly in front of him, breathing hard, hands raw from stone. "You're not the one I came for," Naruto said. His voice was rough with exertion, nothing more. He had not yet learned to be afraid of the right things. "I know," Itachi said. He had rehearsed this moment the way he rehearsed everything, with the flat, joyless precision of a man who had long ago traded spontaneity for control. Sasuke was 2 valleys away and closing. Kisame would hold the old toad sage another 6 minutes, perhaps 8. That left a window, narrow but sufficient, in which to take from this child's mind whatever pieces of the Nine-Tails seal Konoha had been careless enough to let travel outside its walls, and to do it in a way that left no visible mark, because marks invited questions, and questions invited a kind of attention Itachi's remaining life could not survive. He had used Tsukiyomi 11 times before this night. He knew its architecture the way a carpenter knows the grain of a particular wood. 72 hours of subjective time compressed into 3 seconds of the real world. A closed loop, self-terminating, cruel by design, and controlled in every dimension that mattered. It was, in the calculus he had built for himself after Itachi Uchiha stopped being able to afford the luxury of ordinary violence, the mercy. Kisame's blade was not. Naruto's eyes came up wide and furious and undefended, and Itachi's own eyes were already red and waiting, and the trap closed the way traps always close, quietly and too late to matter. What Itachi did not account for was the thread of orange still guttering behind Naruto's irises, the last residue of the chakra he had drawn half a minute earlier to arrest his own fall down the ravine wall. Kurama's chakra did not behave like human chakra. It did not sit quietly in a vessel waiting to be spent. It pulled, it lingered, it pressed its claws into the seams of whatever container tried to hold it, and in the fractional instant that Itachi's Genjutsu reached into Naruto's mind to build its crucifix and its endless afternoon, it found that mind already occupied by something that did not recognize borders, did not recognize 72 hours as a unit of anything, and did not release its grip simply because a stranger's eyes had gone red. Itachi felt the technique catch on something. It was a small sensation at first, like a key turning half a degree past where the lock ends. Then the loop did not close. Inside, the sky was the color of a wound that has stopped bleeding but never healed. A flat iron red with no sun in it, and Naruto was nailed to a cross of black wood that had grown impossibly out of a plane of cracked earth stretching to every horizon at once. He had time to think. This is the Genjutsu Kakashi-sensei told us about. He had time to think. 72 hours. That's what the bingo book said. I can survive 72 hours of anything. He did not yet know how badly the bingo book had lied. Itachi appeared in front of him, holding a short blade, expression unreadable, and drove it into Naruto's chest with the clinical, unhurried motion of a man performing a procedure he has performed many times before. The pain was total and exact, and then Naruto died. And then he was nailed to the cross again, whole, uninjured, and the sky had not changed and the blade came down again. The first 100 repetitions he counted out loud. Somewhere around the 180th, he stopped being able to tell if he was speaking or only thinking the numbers, because his mouth and his mind had started to feel like 2 different rooms in a house with the lights out. By the 400th death, he had stopped flinching before the blade fell. Flinching cost energy he no longer had a reason to spend. By the 1000th, he understood, with the flat certainty of arithmetic rather than despair, that 72 hours was a unit that no longer applied to whatever this was. The sky had not dimmed once. There had been no dawn to mark a day's passing, no dusk, only the single unblinking red, and a boy who had once measured time by ramen bowls and training schedules found himself with no instrument left to measure it by at all. Kurama's voice arrived somewhere after the 2000th death, low and unhurried, dragging through Naruto's skull like a boulder over gravel. You're going to want to stop counting. Naruto did not answer immediately. His mouth still tasted of blood that was not real and would never stop being real. When he did speak, his voice had lost the register that used to carry across training grounds. Why? Because there's nothing at the end of the number. I've watched men count their heartbeats in cages for centuries. It doesn't shorten the sentence. It just teaches you exactly how long the sentence is. You're stuck in here too. I am always stuck in here. This is simply the first time you've been awake enough in your own skull to notice. Itachi's blade came down again. Naruto died again. When he opened his eyes in the cross for the 2001st time, he did not scream. He had, somewhere in the last several hundred cycles, run out of whatever specific fuel screaming required. On the bridge, 3 seconds had not yet finished passing. Kisame felt it before he understood it. A wrongness traveling up through the chakra-thick air of the ravine like cold water, finding a crack in ice. He disengaged from Jiraiya mid-swing, an act so uncharacteristic that the old sage nearly overextended into the opening it should have created, and turned toward the far bank where Itachi stood, with his hands still lifted toward a boy who had gone rigid and glassy-eyed on his knees. Itachi, Kisame said. No response. Itachi, Kisame said. No response. Itachi. Sasuke arrived 4 seconds later, dropping out of the tree line with his sword already drawn, murder narrowed down to a single face, and found that face frozen mid-breath, sharing and spinning without direction, locked onto Naruto's slumped body like a hand that has closed around something and cannot remember how to open again. What did you do to him? Sasuke said. It was not a question. His blade found the gap between Itachi's ribs and stopped a half-inch short, because some part of him, even now, needed the answer before the corpse. Itachi did not turn his head. His lips moved, and the words that came out were not the ones Sasuke expected. Don't touch me. Don't touch either of us. Kakashi's team came over the ridge behind him at the same moment Jiraiya broke off pursuit of Kisame entirely, some older and more animal instinct in him overriding the fight, and the old sage crossed the last 30 feet of broken bridge at a speed that had nothing to do with taijutsu, and everything to do with the specific cold horror of a man who has felt this particular flavor of chakra malfunction once before. Decades ago, in a war he did not talk about. Get back, Jiraiya said, and put himself between Sasuke's blade and Itachi's throat, not to protect the Uchiha, but because some instincts told him that killing Itachi in this instant might do something far worse than fail to save Naruto. Sakura reached Naruto first. She caught him as he folded sideways off his knees, and his eyes were open, and they were not looking at her. And they were not looking at anything in the ravine at all. A century into the loop, Naruto stopped asking Itachi why. The question had cost him something every time he asked it. A fresh wound reopened on top of the old ones, and there was no version of Itachi in this place that answered. The man who killed him over and over was not really Itachi, Kurama had explained somewhere around year 40. Only the shape the technique had assigned to the role of executioner, a mask with no mind behind it, endlessly repeating the same 3 motions: appear, strike, vanish. Understanding this did not make the blade hurt less. It only removed the last illusion that speaking might change anything. By year 60, had learned to fall asleep between deaths. In the seconds of gray, nothing that separated one crucifixion from the next resurrection, because sleep was the only rest the loop permitted, and his body, whatever his body was, in a place with no real body to speak of, had begun demanding it with the mindless persistence of an animal that does not care about philosophy. By year 80, he had stopped crying. This was not recovery. Kurama told him so flatly the one time Naruto asked if it meant he was getting better. It means your body ran out of water to waste on it. There's a difference. Feels the same from in here. It won't, eventually. That's the part that should worry you. Naruto did not ask what Kurama meant by that. He had started, somewhere in the stretch of years, to understand that some answers were worse than the silence they replaced. At year 91, the executioner's shape-wearing Itachi's face varied its pattern for the first time. A small deviation, a blade angled 2 degrees differently, and Naruto realized with the calm of a man noting a change in weather that the loop itself was drifting, degrading at its edges the longer it ran uncorrected, and that whatever had trapped him here was no longer entirely sure of its own borders either. He filed the observation away without excitement. Excitement, like tears, had become a resource he could no longer afford to spend on things that changed nothing. Year 206. The plane had begun to change. Where before there had only been cracked earth, and the black cross, and the flat red sky, now there were shapes gathering at the edges of his vision during the gray intervals between deaths. Indistinct, tall, patient, like figures, glimpsed at the tree line of a forest he had not yet entered. He did not investigate them. Investigation required a version of curiosity he had not carried with him this deep into the loop. They're yours, Kurama said, the first time Naruto noticed one standing close enough to touch. Every death you've had in this place left something behind. It's starting to answer when you don't call it. What is it? I don't know yet. I've been a prisoner for a very long time, kid. I've never watched a jailer grow a second kingdom inside his own cage before. Naruto looked at the shape for a long moment. It had no face he could resolve, only a suggestion of shoulders and a stillness that felt less like menace and more like waiting, the particular patience of his soldiers standing at attention for an order that has not yet been given. He did not reach for it. He did not yet trust himself to reach for anything without it being taken away. Does it hurt you? Being in here with it? Everything about being sealed in a screaming child's skull for a century hurts, Kit. This is not new information. It was, Naruto noted, the first time Kurama had used a word that resembled affection, even wrapped in insult the way Kurama wrapped everything. He did not point this out. Pointing it out felt like it might make Kurama take it back. Outside, in the ravine, 4 seconds had passed since Itachi's eyes went red. Jiraiya knelt over Naruto's body with 2 fingers pressed to the side of his throat, feeling a pulse that was steady, unremarkable, entirely wrong for what his sage-attuned senses were reporting about the chakra beneath the skin. It moved like weather. It moved like something with no fixed shape, trying to reroute itself through channels built for a much smaller storm. Kakashi, Jiraiya said, without looking up. How long has he been like this? 4, 5 seconds maybe. It happened as we crested the ridge. Kakashi's visible eye had not left Itachi. What is happening to him? I don't know yet. Jiraiya's voice had none of its usual theater in it, but it isn't Chusmeal behaving the way Chusmeal is supposed to behave. I've seen the aftermath of that technique before. This isn't the aftermath. This is the technique still running. Sasuke's blade had not lowered. Then stop it. You don't understand how this works, Itachi said. His voice had gone thinner, stretched tight over something underneath it that even his rigid discipline could not entirely smooth. I am not choosing to hold this. I cannot release what I no longer control. Then what happens? Sakura said, still holding Naruto's shoulders, still watching his open, unfocused eyes. If you can't let go? Itachi did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice had gone very quiet, the clinical precision of it cracking at exactly 1 syllable. I don't know. Year 400. The shapes of the tree line had multiplied into a crowd, and the crowd had begun, without instruction, to arrange itself into something resembling ranks. Naruto did not build this. He understood that much clearly, even through the fog that had settled permanently over whatever part of him used to ask questions eagerly. He had not decided to command anything. He had only kept dying and kept being nailed back to the cross, and kept, somewhere below the level of conscious thought, refusing. Not loudly, not with fists raised to a sky that had never once changed color, but with the stubborn, wordless refusal of a body that will not stop repairing itself, even after the mind that lived in it has stopped believing repair means anything. That refusal, it seemed, had weight. It had begun over 400 years of repetition, to take on shape the way pressure takes on shape in stone, forming ranks and files out of every echo of every death he had endured and would not let end him. You should be more frightened of this than you are, Kurama said, watching the ranks assemble from somewhere Naruto could not see him. I have lived 9 lives longer than most gods manage, and I have never seen a soul do this to itself, out of nothing but grief. It's not out of nothing. Naruto's voice by year 400 had lost every trace of the sing-song cadence that used to carry his name across a village that mostly wanted him quiet. It had gone flat, precise, worn smooth the way river stones go smooth. It's out of every time I didn't get back up before. This is just the part that keeps getting back up when I stop being able to. And that's a distinction, without much difference, kid. Maybe. He watched the ranks stand at ease, waiting, patient in a way nothing in this red sky plain had any right to be patient. But it's the only part of me that's still doing anything on its own. So I'm not going to be scared of it. Kurama said nothing for a long while after that. When he finally spoke again, it was not to argue. No, I don't suppose you should be. Year 1000. The cross itself had begun to crack. It happened slowly, one hairline fracture appearing across the black wood after a death. Naruto could no longer place a number 2 with any confidence, because somewhere past the 800th year, he had stopped counting the way a person stops counting steps on a staircase they have climbed 10,000 times, not out of boredom, but because the number had ceased to be information and become only noise. He noticed the crack the way he noticed everything now, without alarm, without hope, only observation logged and set aside. The executioner's shape struck, as it always struck. This time the blade caught on the fracture and skipped, and for the space of 1 heartbeat, the pain that followed was not total. It was the first incomplete death he had experienced in 1,000 years. He did not celebrate. He had by this point forgotten most of the physical vocabulary of celebration. What muscles moved when a person laughed? What a laugh sounded like leaving a throat that had spent a millennium screaming into a sky that never answered. But some old, buried, stubborn thing in him registered the crack in the wood and understood, with the flat clarity of a fact rather than an emotion, that if the cross could break once, it could break again. You're not the same as the one who walked into this, Kurama said. That night, if night was a word that still applied to a sky with no sun to set, you know that. I know. Does it bother you? Naruto looked at his own hands, which had not aged a day in 1,000 years and never would within this loop. Hands that had killed the same shadow of the same man more times than any number could comfortably hold. Hands that had, without his permission, begun to raise ranks of the dead out of a plane that should have been empty. I don't know if bother is a word I still have room for, he said. But I haven't stopped wanting to go home, if that's what you're asking. That's not nothing, Kit. No, he agreed, watching the crack in the black wood catch the flat red light. It's not nothing. Year 3000. The ranks had a shape now, and the shape had a name that arrived in Naruto's mind the way water arrives in a cracked vessel. Not delivered, but leaking through from somewhere already full. He did not choose the word monarch. It simply surfaced one death at a time, syllable by syllable, the way a fossil surfaces out of rock worn down by 10,000 rains, until it sat whole and unavoidable in the place where his old certainties used to live. He had once believed with his whole chest that he would be Hokage. That belief had not survived past year 600, not because he stopped wanting it, but because wanting had become a luxury the loop steadily priced him out of. What replaced it did not feel like ambition. It felt like inheritance, the grim, unglamorous kind that comes with debts attached, a crown made of every hour he had refused to stay dead, handed to him not by any court but by his own unwillingness to disappear entirely into the red sky's silence. "They're waiting for you to say something," Kurama observed, the ranks standing motionless at the tree line, thousands strong now, faceless and patient. "They've been waiting a long time. What am I supposed to say?" "I don't know. I've never commanded anything that wasn't trying to eat me." Naruto stood at the base of the cracked cross, no longer nailed to it. The technique had, at some point past the second millennium, stopped bothering to reset that particular detail, as though even its own architecture had grown too worn to maintain every cruelty at once, and looked at the ranks the way a man looks at a debt he cannot repay and cannot walk away from either. "Rise," he said. It came out quiet. It came out like the last word of a much longer sentence he had already said, silently 10,000 times before he ever spoke it aloud. The ranks did not cheer. They did not shout his name. They simply moved, in unison, one single fractional step forward, the way a tide moves when the moon finally pulls hard enough, and something in the plane itself answered that motion, a deep, grinding shift beneath the cracked earth, as though the whole dead world had been holding its breath for 3,000 years waiting to hear that word from the one person in it who had a right to say it. Naruto did not smile. He had, by this point, no memory of what a smile required, but something in his chest, buried under 3 millennia of accumulated grief, did not flinch away from the sound of the ground answering him. It leaned into it. Outside, in the ravine, 6 seconds had passed. Kisame had gone entirely still, watching Itachi's rigid posture with an expression that, for the first time since the Sword Nin had joined the Akatsuki, showed something other than lazy amusement. "Itachi, talk to me." "I can't." Itachi's voice had thinned to something almost breathless, though his lungs, his chest, every visible part of him remained motionless as stone. "It's still expanding. I don't have the reference points to measure it against." "Then kill him," Kisame said, flat, practical, the closest thing to concern he owned dressed up as strategy. "Whatever you're locked into, it ends when the target dies. That's how Genjutsu works. It ends when the technique concludes on its own terms." Itachi Sharingan spun faster, uselessly, chasing something that was no longer inside the parameters he had spent a decade mastering. "I built this to conclude in 72 hours of subjective time. It has not concluded." Jiraiya's face, when he looked up from Naruto's motionless body, had lost every trace of its usual performance. "How long has it been running?" "In there." "I don't know." For the first time in longer than he cared to measure, Itachi Uchiha's clinical composure produced a sentence with no confidence behind it at all. "Longer than it should be able to. I can feel the boundaries of it stretching every second we stand here, and I cannot find the edge of it to pull it closed." Sasuke's blade, still hovering at Itachi's throat, trembled. Not from fear, and not yet from grief, but from the particular fury of a boy watching the only man he still wanted to kill, for a reason he understood, suddenly become the only man who might know how to save the person kneeling in the dirt behind him. "Then find it," Sasuke said, "or I stop caring what happens to you when this is over." Itachi did not answer him. There was nothing yet to answer with. Year 6000. The monarch. Naruto no longer resisted the word, though he never once spoke it about himself aloud, had stopped counting deaths altogether because the loop had stopped killing him with any regularity worth tracking. The cross had shattered fully by year 4200, splinters absorbed into the growing dark that pooled at the edges of the plane, like ink, finding the lowest point of a table. The executioner's shape still appeared sometimes, a habit of the technique rather than a threat, and Naruto killed it now when it came, quickly, without cruelty and without hesitation. The way a man swats a fly, he has stopped being able to fear. His army, he had stopped pretending the word did not apply, filled a horizon that had once held nothing but cracked earth and one black cross. They did not speak. They did not need to. He had built, without meaning to and without any way to stop, a kingdom out of every second he had refused to disappear. And the kingdom had grown large enough now to have its own weather, its own gravity, a pressure in the red sky that felt, when he stood at its center, less like a prison and more like a throne room with the walls not yet built around it. "You could stay," Kurama said, once near year 7000, not as encouragement but as observation. The way an old soldier observes a comrade's wound has stopped hurting them the way it should. There is nothing left out there for you that this place cannot give you more of. Power. Silence. Rule without the small cruelties of people who never once tried to understand what you were. Naruto stood at the edge of his own gathered dead, looking out at nothing, at the same flat red sky that had not changed color in 7,000 years, and thought about ramen. It was not a large thought. It did not arrive with any drama attached to it. It simply surfaced the way the word monarch had once surfaced, unbidden, whole. The specific steam and salt smell of Ichiraku's broth on a cold morning, Tsuchi's voice asking if he wanted the usual, Aruka's hand on the back of his head that one time after a mission went badly, small and stupid and utterly undefeated by 7,000 years of dying. "No," he said. I don't think I could. Why not? Because somebody's going to ask if I want extra pork when I get back, Naruto said. And there was no humor left in his voice to carry the joke, only the bare fact of it, stated the way a man states the only load-bearing wall left standing in a house otherwise leveled to the foundation. And I want to be there to say yes. Kurama was quiet for a long time after that. 10,000 years from now, the fox finally said, I want you to remember you said that. Because I don't think either of us is going to like what's left of you by the time this thing lets go. I'll remember. Naruto watched the ranks at the tree line stand, patient, endless, entirely his. That's the part I'm not going to let it take. Outside on the bridge over the Kanabi ravine, 11 seconds had passed since Itachi Uchiha's eyes first went red. Jiraiya had both hands on Naruto's chest now, feeding chakra into a body that resisted it, the way stone resists water, not violently, simply completely, as though whatever was happening inside that skull had sealed itself off from every outside hand trying to reach it. Sakura's hands had gone white-knuckled where they gripped Naruto's shoulders. Kakashi had positioned himself, finally, between Sasuke's blade and Itachi's throat, not out of loyalty to either, but out of the grim professional certainty that killing the one man who might understand what was happening would guarantee they never got Naruto back at all. Itachi's composure, when it finally cracked quietly. There was no scream in it, no theater. Only a single sentence, delivered in the same, measured, velvet register he used for everything, made unbearable by what it admitted. I think, he said, I have made a mistake I do not know how to undo. Somewhere behind that admission, in a part of himself he rarely allowed anyone to see, something that might have been regret moved through him the way cold moves through a body that has already decided not to shiver. He had built this technique to be a mercy. He had used it 11 times before tonight, with total, surgical control. Confident in his own precision, the way a surgeon is confident in a scalpel, he has sharpened 1,000 times. He had never once accounted for a mind that did not obey the shape of the cage he built for it. And now he stood locked to that cage's open door, unable to close it, watching a body that had not aged a visible second continue breathing steadily while something vast and patient and no longer entirely human accumulated behind its open, unseeing eyes. Fix it, Sasuke said. I don't know if there is a fix, Itachi said. I only know there is an end, and I cannot tell you what walks out of it when it comes. Year 9,999. The plane had a throne on it now. It was not made of anything Naruto had chosen. Not gold, not bone, not the black wood of the shattered cross, though pieces of all three had gone into it without his direction, the way a riverbed accumulates whatever the current carries down to it, over enough centuries. He sat on it because his legs had, at some point past the 8th millennium, stopped requiring rest, and standing had simply become a habit he no longer needed, rather than a necessity he still did. His army stood arrayed below him in ranks that no longer had a visible end. Faceless, silent, entirely obedient to a will that had stopped needing to speak its orders aloud. Kurama had gone quiet in the last century, not from anger, but from something closer to the exhausted, watchful silence of an old animal that has run out of warnings worth repeating. Naruto looked at his own hands, unaged, unmarked by 10,000 years of accumulated dying, and thought with the flat clarity of a fact rather than a hope, about a bowl of ramen he had never gotten to finish. How much longer? He asked, not really expecting an answer. I don't know, Kurama rumbled, from somewhere deep inside a mind that had grown too large now to have clean edges. But I can feel the seams of this place starting to give. Whatever's holding the door open out there, it's tired. It's been tired for a while. Good, Naruto said. He did not stand from the throne. He did not need to. I'd like to go home now. You understand what you're going to be when that door opens. Yeah. His voice, after 10,000 years, had settled into something with no give left in it at all, low and level and entirely without performance. I understand. And you're still going to walk through it wanting ramen. That's the part I'm keeping, Naruto said, and for the first time in longer than either of them could accurately measure, something in his chest that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else moved, briefly, and was gone. Everything else, they can be afraid of if they want to. That part's mine. The sky above the throne, flat and red for 10,000 unbroken years, cracked, not violently, but the way ice cracks under a weight it is finally, after long enough, stopped being able to bear. On the bridge, Itachi Uchiha's Sharingan guttered, flared once, and went out. Naruto's eyes opened. 12 seconds had passed since the loop began. The sun over the Kanabi ravine had not moved a visible degree in the sky. Jiraiya's hands were still pressed to a chest that had, for the first time since this began, started breathing on its own again, deep and slow and entirely too calm for a body that had been catatonic a heartbeat earlier. Nobody standing on that bridge understood yet what had just come back to them, wearing the face of the boy they had lost 12 seconds ago. Naruto blinked once, looked up at a sky he had not seen in 10,000 years, and said in a voice with no volume left in it at all, I want ramen. Sakura's hands, still locked around his shoulders, went rigid. Jiraiya's chakra, still flowing into a chest that no longer needed it, stuttered and stopped. Nobody laughed. Chapter 2. The weight that followed him home. Kisame Hoshigaki had fought men who stopped screaming halfway through dying, and men who never started. He had never once in a career built on making corpses out of people who thought they were safe, felt the specific cold that came off Itachi Uchiha's collapsed shoulders in the seconds after the boy's eyes opened. Get up. Kisame said. Itachi did not get up. He knelt on the broken span of the bridge with both hands pressed flat against stone, sharing and bled out to plain black, breathing in shallow pulls that did nothing to fill his chest. Whatever the technique had cost him, it had not built him in the currency he was used to spending. I want ramen, the boy said again, quieter the second time, as though testing whether the sentence still worked, now that the air around it had gone still. Nobody answered him. Sakura's hands were still locked to his shoulders and she did not loosen them. Staring at a face she recognized down to the last freckle and did not, in any way that mattered, recognize at all. Jiraiya's chakra, still pooled uselessly against a chest that no longer wanted it, withdrew slowly, the way a man withdraws a hand from water he has just realized is much colder than it looked. Naruto. Jiraiya's voice had none of its usual weight behind it. Look at me. Naruto looked at him. It was not the look of a boy searching an adult's face for reassurance. It was the look of something cataloging, a shape it already knew, filing the information without needing to ask for more of it. I'm looking, he said. How long? Jiraiya said. How long were you in there? Naruto's mouth moved, and for a moment something crossed behind his eyes that resembled the effort of translation. A man reaching for a unit of measurement in a language that had stopped applying to him a long time ago. Long enough, he said finally, that I stopped counting. Kisame had already turned toward Itachi, hauling him up by the collar with one hand, the other resting on Samehada's wrapped grip in a way that made clear he had reassessed the value of standing near this bridge much longer. We're done here, Kisame. We're done. The big man's eyes cut once toward Naruto, flat and calculating in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a specific arithmetic of a professional who has just watched the terms of an engagement change beneath him without warning. Whatever that is now. It isn't a Jinchuriki extraction target anymore. Not today. Not with you, bled dry, and me not knowing what happens if it decides to be interested in us. Itachi did not resist being pulled upright. His legs held him, barely, the composure that had carried him through 11 controlled uses of his strongest technique nowhere in evidence now. He looked at Naruto once more before Kisame turned them both toward the tree line, and whatever passed across his face in that half-second was gone before anyone standing close enough to Naruto thought to watch for it. I am sorry, Itachi said. It was not loud. It was not meant to be heard by anyone but the boy it was addressed to. I did not intend this. Naruto's reply came without heat, without the fury that should have belonged to the words, delivered instead in the same flat register he had used to ask for ramen. I know. Then Itachi was gone into the mist with Kisame's hand still gripping his collar, and the bridge over the Kanabi ravine held only the people who had come looking for Tsunade and had found, instead, something none of them had a category for yet. Jiraiya called the retreat to a defensible clearing 2 hours march from the ravine, not because anyone had asked him to, but because the alternative was standing on a bridge waiting for whatever had answered Itachi's justu to decide it wanted to keep answering things. Kakashi took point without being told. Sasuke walked at the rear with his sword still drawn, glancing back toward Naruto every few dozen steps, with the particular wariness of a boy watching a dog he has always trusted suddenly stop wagging its tail. Sakura tried first, because Sakura always tried first. You're doing that thing, she said, keeping pace beside him, voice pitched for a lightness she did not feel. Where you don't say anything for a really long time, and then you say the wrong thing, and I have to hit you. You're overdue. Naruto walked with his hands loose at his sides, gaze forward, unhurried in a way that made the ground beneath his feet look somehow more solid than it had any right to. I don't think I'm going to give you a reason to hit me, he said. That's what worries me. He turned his head toward her then, and for one moment something in his expression softened at the edges, not quite the grin she was used to, but close enough to its shape that her chest loosened a fraction before she caught herself doing it. I still want the reason, he said. I just don't have the noise to go with it right now. It was not comfort. It was not meant to be. But it was, Sakura thought, the first sentence he had said since the bridge that sounded like it had come from someone she used to know, and she held onto it the way a person holds onto a single warm stone pulled out of a river that has otherwise gone entirely to ice. They made camp before full dark, in a hollow ringed by pine that Kakashi judged defensible on 3 sides. Jiraiya took first watch and did not sit. He stood at the tree line with his arms crossed, looking back at the fire and at the boy sitting near it with his knees drawn up, unmoving, watching the flames the way other people watched weather they had already decided not to be afraid of. He's not eating, Sasuke said, low, coming up beside the old sage. He asked for ramen on a bridge with a man's chakra locked into his skull, Jiraiya said. I think he's got some appetite left in him. Give him time. Time for what? Jiraiya did not answer immediately. He had fought in a war that taught him what men looked like when they came back from things that should have killed them and hadn't. The specific stillness that settled into a person's hands after they had spent long enough believing they would not survive the next hour, and he recognized the shape of that stillness now in a 12-year-old boy poking at a campfire with his stick, as though testing whether fire still behaved the way he remembered it behaving. I don't know yet, Jiraiya admitted, but whatever happened to him in there, it didn't happen in 3 seconds. Look at his hands. Sasuke looked. Naruto's hands were steady, entirely steady, holding the stick with a loose, economical grip of someone who had done something with his fingers 10,000 times more often than he had done anything else in his life. That's not fear, Jiraiya said quietly. That's practice. The attack came just past the second watch change. 4 missing 9 out of Rain Country who had been tracking the noise of the earlier battle and made the mistake of assuming the camp this small, guarded by an old man and a handful of kids, would be an easy strip of a corpse and whatever equipment survived it. Kakashi took the first 2 before they cleared the tree line, a habit of reflex sharpened over a decade of exactly this kind of ambush. The third came in low under Sasuke's guard, blade angled for the throat, and Sakura's kunai deflected it a half-second before it would have connected, buying just enough time for Jiraiya to close the distance and end the fourth with a single strike that folded the man's ribs inward like wet paper. Naruto had not moved from beside the fire. The fifth man, the one none of them had counted because he had circled wide through the tree line specifically to avoid the noise of the fight, came out of the dark behind Naruto's back with a wire already looped for the throat, moving with the flat, professional silence of someone who had done this exact motion enough times to trust it completely. He never reached him. Something rose out of the shadow the campfire threw against the ground, wordless, without ceremony, without the drawn-out theater of a summoning seal or the flare of chakra that should have announced its arrival. One moment there was only firelight and dark grass, the next, a shake stood between the wire and Naruto's throat, tall, indistinct at the edges, the way smoke is indistinct, and it did not fight the man so much as end him. A single motion, quick and utterly without cruelty in it, the way a hand ends a candle flame between finger and thumb. The body dropped. The shadow folded back into the dark it had come from, unhurried, as though it had never expected to need to explain itself to anyone. Sakura's breath left her in a single ragged pull. Sasuke had gone rigid, sword half raised toward a target that no longer existed to swing at. Kakashi's visible eye had gone very wide, then very narrow, cataloging what he had just watched with the specific dread of a man recalculating every threat assessment he had ever made about the boy sitting 3 feet from a dead man's body. Naruto had still not turned around. Sorry, he said, to no one in particular, prodding the fire again with the stick. Forgot to warn you that happens now. Drake crossed the clearing slowly, stepping around the corpse without looking at it too closely, and crouched beside Naruto with the deliberate care of a man approaching something he was no longer entirely sure was safe to be close to. What was that? He said. Naruto considered the question for a moment, the way he considered everything now, weighing it against some internal ledger the rest of them had no access to. Mine, he said. Everything in the dark that answers when I need it to. That's mine now. He's being generous with the pronoun, Kurama's voice rumbled, somewhere behind Naruto's sternum, low enough that only he could hear it. None of that is a metaphor for him, old man. Tell your students to sleep lighter tonight. They're not sharing a camp with a Jinchuriki anymore. They're sharing one with a throne. Naruto did not relay the second half of that sentence to Jiraiya. He was not yet certain the words would land the way he meant them, and some part of him, small and stubborn and entirely unwilling to disappear, still wanted the old man's face to keep the shape it had right now, worried rather than afraid. Get some sleep, Naruto said instead. I'll watch. I don't think I need to anymore anyway. Nobody argued with him. Nobody watching the dead man cooling 3 feet from the firelight felt much like arguing with anything he said for the rest of that night. 300 miles north, in a windowless room on the second floor of the Konoha Intelligence Division, Shikamaru Nara stared at a sheet of chakra sensor data and did not like a single number written on it. The report had come in by Hawk 2 hours after moonrise, relayed from an outpost stationed along the Kanabi Ravine's northern ridge, whose entire job consisted of sitting very still and recording the ambient chakra fluctuations that passed through the region, in case any of them belonged to a new Chunin worth reporting. The outpost's sensor, a Chunin named Ebisu's cousin, whom Shikamaru had never met, and now never particularly wanted to, had logged a spike at the time of the confrontation on the bridge, and then, unusually, had kept logging it, because the spike had not behaved the way spikes were supposed to behave. It had not risen and fallen the way a Jutsu's chakra signature was supposed to rise and fall. It had risen, held, and then continued rising, in an unbroken curve. For the entire 12 seconds the sensor's instruments recorded activity from that location before losing the signal entirely to what the report's margin notes described, with the flat professional understatement Shikamaru had learned to read as genuine alarm, as unclassifiable interference. He rubbed at his eyes and looked at the number again. It did not improve on a second reading. 12 seconds, Asuma said. From the doorway, smoke curling off the cigarette he had not bothered to put out before walking into a records room he technically wasn't cleared for, tonight. That's the whole window. 12 seconds of real time, yeah. Shikamaru tapped the sensor curve with the end of his pen, not looking up. The Uchiha Kid Sharingan technique, from everything we've got on record about it, the one incident report we managed to pull off a survivor a few years back, runs about a 72-hour subjective loop compressed into 2, maybe 3 seconds real time. That's the compression ratio, roughly 1,000 to 1, fixed, consistent across every documented instance. And this one ran 12 seconds instead of 3, 4 times longer than it should have. Shikamaru set the pen down and looked at the curve one more time, the exponential creep of it climbing steadily rather than spiking and dropping the way every prior recorded instance of the technique had. If the ratio held steady across that extra time, we're not talking about 72 hours in there anymore. We're talking about something in the range of, conservatively, a decade, if the ratio held steady. But it didn't hold steady. Asuma had read the same curve upside down from across the desk, and his voice had lost most of its usual dry patience. It's not linear. look at the slope past the 6-second mark. Shikamaru did look. He had already looked 3 times before Asuma walked in, and each time the shape of the data told him the same thing in slightly plainer language. The compression ratio had not stayed fixed. It had accelerated, the curve bending upward the longer the technique held, as though whatever mechanism translated real seconds into subjective years had itself begun to fail, spending more and more of the loop's internal time for every fraction of a real second that passed. Extrapolated honestly, without rounding down out of politeness to how insane the number sounded, the final estimate the sensor data supported was not a decade. It was somewhere in the low 5 figures. Years. That's not possible, Shikamaru said, out loud, mostly to hear how it sounded, because writing a number like that in a report meant for people who signed off on missions with real Genins' lives attached to them felt like an act of professional malpractice, even if the sensor logs backed it to the decimal. Where's the kid now? Asuma asked. With Jiraiya-sama's group. Heading back. ETAs tomorrow evening if they don't stop to rest. Shikamaru set the report down, finally, and rubbed at the back of his neck, the specific, low dread of a man who has just done arithmetic he wished he could unlearn settling behind his ribs, like a stone he could not put down without dropping it on someone else. Whatever the numbers say happened to him in there, he's going to walk through the front gate looking like he aged one day. Everybody's going to see a kid who looks fine and act accordingly. And you think that's the problem? I think, Shikamaru said, that a person doesn't come back from something like that, the same shape they left in. And I think whatever shape he does come back in, this village doesn't have a category for it yet. And when this village doesn't have a category for something, it tends to reach for the same 3 tools every time. Seal it. Study it. Or bury it. Asuma was quiet for a long moment, cigarette burning down between 2 fingers without being drawn from. You're going to want to be very careful who you show that curve to, he said finally. Already thought of that. Shikamaru folded the report and slid it into his flak jacket rather than the outbound tray on the desk. A small violation of procedure that he weighed for exactly as long as it took to decide it was worth the risk. Because the second Homura and Koharu see this number, they're not going to be thinking about a kid who wants to come home. They're going to be thinking about a weapon that spent 10,000 years learning how to hold a grudge, and they're going to want it handled before it ever gets close enough to the village to decide it doesn't like the terms. He was not wrong about that, though the timeline he imagined for it was generous. 2 floors above the sealed archive where Shikamaru had folded the report into his jacket, in a room with no windows and a single lamp turned low enough to keep every face in it half in shadow. Homura Mitokado read a shorter version of the same curve delivered by a different messenger and set it down on the table without visible reaction. The boy is a Jinchuriki, Koharu said before he could speak. Whatever the Uchiha's technique did to his mind, the seal held. The fox is still contained. That much the report is clear on. The seal holding the fox was never the question I was worried about. Homura's fingers steepled together on the table's dark wood. The question is, what else was in that mind for 10,000 years to build, uninterrupted, with nothing to stop it and nothing to answer to but its own appetite for surviving? Behind them, a third figure stood near the wall with the stillness of a man who had spent decades learning that standing still in the right room was worth more than speaking in it. He wore no visible mark of rank, no headband, nothing that would identify him to anyone who passed him in a market square, and that anonymity was, itself, the only credential that mattered in this particular room. Root has 3 teams within 2 days' travel of the Kanabi corridor, he said, when Homura's gaze finally settled on him. They can be repositioned to intercept before the group reaches the village gates, if that is the council's preference. It is not, yet. Homura's voice carried the specific patience of a man who had outlived several younger, hungrier decision-makers, precisely by never moving before the ground beneath a decision had finished settling. A Jinchuriki who returns from a mission wearing a wound nobody can see is a diplomatic liability if handled carelessly, and an asset of considerable value if handled correctly. We do not yet know which category applies. Move your teams to observe, nothing more. Not yet. And if the observation confirms the sensor data, Koharu said, and what walks through that gate tomorrow is no longer something the village's ordinary containment measures were designed to hold? Homura did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice had not risen at all, had lost none of its careful institutional calm, and that was, in its own way, more unsettling than if it had. Then we will do what this village has always done with power. It cannot afford to leave unmanaged, he said. We will manage it. Quietly, if the boy allows it. By other means, if he does not. The figure by the wall inclined his head a fraction, the closest thing to acknowledgement he offered anyone in that room, and was gone from it a moment later, without either counselor hearing the door. Dawn found the retreating party 6 hours from the outer checkpoints, moving at a pace Jiraiya had set, deliberately slow, less out of fatigue than out of the old sage's unspoken need to have a few more hours to watch the boy walking beside him before that boy became, once more, someone the village's entire administrative machinery would have opinions about. Naruto walked without effort, without the small stumbles of exhaustion that should have belonged to a body that had spent the previous night watching for threats instead of sleeping. His gaze moved across the tree line the way a soldier's gaze moves across ground. He has already decided he could defend from any angle. Cataloging without anxiety the specific unbothered attention of someone for whom ambush had stopped being a fear and become, instead, only a category of event he had already survived more times than he could count. "You're doing the thing again," Kurama observed. From wherever inside him, the fox now occupied space that had grown considerably larger and considerably quieter than the cramped seal it used to be confined to. "Scanning the ground like you're counting how many of them it would take before it got interesting." "Old habit," Naruto said, low enough that it read as talking to himself if anyone glanced over. "It's not an old habit. You didn't have that habit before the bridge. You have it now, because for the last several thousand years the only interesting thing that ever happened to you was a fight, and your body decided that's the baseline it should be measuring every quiet moment against. Is that bad?" "I don't know yet." Kurama's voice carried none of its old contempt, only the flat, weathered honesty of something that had watched every stage of this happen and had run out of certainty about where it ended. "I've been angry at people for a very long time, kid. I know the shape anger takes when it's had enough centuries to calcify into something a person mistakes for calm. You're wearing that shape right now, and you don't even know you put it on." Naruto did not answer that immediately. Ahead of him, Sakura walked a half-step closer to Sasuke than strict formation required, glancing back every few minutes the way a person checks a wound to see if it has stopped bleeding yet. He watched her do it and felt, distantly, the specific ache of wanting to close that half-step of distance and not knowing anymore exactly which muscles used to do that. "I still want to be the one who closes the gap," he said, quiet, "even if I don't remember how loud I used to be about it. That's the part you kept." Kurama's rumble carried something almost gentle in it, buried under 10,000 years of resentment that had, somewhere along the way, worn down into something closer to kinship than either of them had bothered to name. "Hold on to it harder than you hold on to anything else this village hands you when you walk back through that gate. Because I promise you, kid, every single person waiting for you on the other side of it is going to look at what's standing where their friend used to be, and most of them are going to flinch first and ask questions second. Not all of them." "No," Kurama agreed after a pause long enough to suggest he had considered arguing and decided against it. "Not all of them. But enough of them that you're going to need to decide, fairly soon, how much of what happened to you in there you're willing to let them see before they decide what to do about it." Naruto looked ahead at the first pale line of Konoha's outer wall, still hours distant, a thin gray seam against the horizon that at once meant home without any complication attached to the word. "I'm not hiding it," he said. It was not defiance. It carried none of the heat defiance usually carried. It was simply a fact, stated the way he stated everything now, flat and load-bearing. "I spent 10,000 years being the only thing standing between me and disappearing entirely. I'm not going to spend the day after that pretending I'm smaller than I am, so it's easier for somebody's meeting to sit comfortably." "Good," Kurama said. "Because the ones in that meeting who go looking for a way to make you smaller anyway are not going to enjoy finding out how that math works out for them." By late afternoon, the party crossed the last checkpoint before the outer road narrowed toward the village proper, and it was there, at a supply post, manned by two Chunin who had no idea what curve of sensor data had already crossed 3 desks above their rank, that Sasuke finally said the thing he had been carrying since the ambush. "You didn't even look at him," he said, low, falling into step beside Naruto while Jiraiya spoke with the checkpoint guards ahead. "The one with the wire. You didn't even turn around." "I didn't need to. That's not an answer." Naruto glanced at him, and something in his expression, for the first time since the bridge, cost him a visible effort to hold flat. A fraction of a second with the stillness cracked, and something older and more tired than either of them had a right to carry at their age showed through the seam. "I spent longer than I can explain to you learning that turning around costs time I don't always have," he said. "It's not that I don't care whether the wire gets there. It's that caring and reacting stopped being the same motion a long time ago. I built something that reacts faster than I do now. That's not me being cold about it, Sasuke. That's just what's true." Sasuke walked in silence for several paces, processing that the way he processed most things, filtering it against the specific yardstick of his own losses, his own nights spent rebuilding himself out of grief, until grief became the only architecture he trusted. "How long?" he said finally. "The real number. Not long enough that I stopped counting. The real one." Naruto did not answer right away. When he did, his voice had gone very quiet, quieter than it had been at any point since the bridge, a register that made even the birdsong along the checkpoint road seem too loud by comparison. 10,000 years, he said. "Give or take a few I might have lost track of near the beginning before I understood what I was losing track of." Sasuke stopped walking. Naruto did not stop with him. He kept moving forward at the same unhurried, load-bearing pace he had carried since the bridge, and after a moment Sasuke's footsteps resumed behind him, faster now, closing the gap the way a person closes a gap when the ground beneath the conversation has just given way entirely, and there is nowhere left to stand except closer to the only other person who might understand the fall. "That's not possible," Sasuke said, echoing, almost exactly, the words Shikamaru had said to an empty records room the night before. "No," Naruto agreed. "It isn't. It happened anyway." Ahead, the gray seam of Konoha's outer wall had grown into something with visible gates, visible watchtowers, visible guards whose faces Naruto recognized without effort, the specific muscle memory of a boy who had once run through those gates late for the academy more mornings than he could count. He looked at the wall the way a man looks at the last page of a book he has already decided he cannot put down unfinished, and felt, underneath 10,000 years of accumulated stillness, the small and stubborn insistence of wanting, very badly, to walk through it and ask Tutuchi for the usual, extra pork, and to have someone, anyone, sit down across the counter and act like nothing about the person ordering it had changed at all. He knew, even as he wanted it, that no one on the other side of that gate was going to give him that mercy for free. "They're watching already," Kurama said, low, as the checkpoint guards waved the party through without incident, unaware of the sensor curve already sitting folded in a records division jacket, unaware of the three names discussing containment protocols in a windowless room, unaware of anything except a returning hero party and a boy who looked, from a distance, exactly the same age he had left at. "I can feel it. Something in this village is already deciding what to do about you, Kit, and it started deciding before you were even close enough to smell the ramen stand." "Let them decide," Naruto said, and there was no fear in it, no bravado either, only the same flat certainty that had carried him through 9,999 years of a throne he had never asked to inherit. "I already decided what I'm keeping. Whatever they've got planned, it's not going to change that part." The gates of Konoha rose ahead of them, unchanged, indifferent to the 10,000 years that had passed inside the mind of the boy walking toward them. And somewhere behind that boy's calm, patient eyes, an army with no visible shape waited in the dark at his heels, silent, endless, and entirely his to command. Chapter 3, The God Who Still Wants Ramen. The gate guards recognized Jiraiya's silhouette before they recognized anyone walking beside him, which was the only reason the party made it past the checkpoint without a full alert being called. Kotetsu leaned out of the guard booth, already grinning, already reaching for the clipboard that logged returning shinobi, and stopped with his pen half an inch above the paper, because the boy walking third in line was looking at him the way a man looks at a door he has already decided he can open, whether or not it is locked. "Naruto?" Kotetsu said. "Hey." The word came out level, unhurried, stripped of every rising note it used to carry. "Good to see the gates still standing." Kotetsu laughed, because that was the reflex a person reached for when a joke landed slightly wrong and the alternative was silence. Izumo did not laugh. Izumo had spent 4 years on this gate watching genin come home for missions in every possible condition, and he recognized, in the particular way Naruto's eyes tracked the guard booth's blind corners before settling on anything else, the specific vigilance of men twice his age who had survived things they did not talk about at dinner. Word moved through the village faster than the party's feet did. By the time they reached the second checkpoint on the main road, Iruka was already there, having heard secondhand from a Chunin runner that Naruto's team had come through the gate, and he did not wait for the formalities of a proper reception. He crossed the road, at a jog with his Chunin vest still half-buttoned, and caught Naruto by both shoulders the way he had 100 times before, the gesture worn smooth from repetition. Warm and immediate and entirely unguarded. "You're back early," Iruka said. "Sunatsuma sent word you'd found something faster then?" He stopped. His hands were still on Naruto's shoulders. He had not moved them, but something in his face rearranged itself in the space of a breath. The specific recalibration of a man who has hugged the same shape 100 times and abruptly discovers the weight underneath it has changed without any visible reason for the change at all. "Naruto," Iruka said, quieter now. "I'm here." A pause, brief, and then, almost gently, "It's still me, sensei. I promise you that part." Iruka's hands did not let go, but they loosened, the grip settling from something anchored into something closer to holding on. He did not ask the question that had risen in his throat, because some instinct, older than his training and sharper than his affection, told him this was not a question to ask in the middle of a public road with half the returning party still watching. "Ramen," he said instead, and it came out rough, an offering rather than a question. "You look like you could use it." Something in Naruto's chest, buried under 10,000 years of accumulated stillness, did not flinch away from that offer. It leaned into it, the way it had leaned into the sound of the ground, answering a single spoken word on a plain with no sun. "Yeah," he said. "I really could." Tsunade had returned to the village 2 weeks earlier than this party, her own recruitment having concluded with considerably less drama than the ambush at Kanabi Ravine, and she had spent the intervening days settling into duties she had not asked for and did not entirely want, examining the aftermath of a village that had bled its old Hokage out through negligence and grief. She was in the middle of reviewing hospital staffing rotations when Shizune arrived at her office door without knocking, which told Tsunade everything she needed to know before Shizune said a single word. "He's back," Shizune said. "Jiraiya-sama's group. They just cleared the outer checkpoint. That's fast." There was an incident. Shizune's voice had the careful flatness of someone relaying information she had not fully processed herself. "Akatsuki, Itachi Uchiha, used a genjutsu on Naruto. Something went wrong with it." Tsunade set down the staffing roster. "Wrong how?" "The reports aren't clear." Shikamaru Nara filed a sensor analysis last night that got flagged straight to the elders before it reached her desk. "I only saw it because I was in the archive when the runner came through." Shizune hesitated, an unusual gap in her otherwise clipped delivery. "The numbers in it don't make sense, Tsunade-sama. Not in any framework I've ever studied." "Give me the short version." "The technique should have run for 72 hours of subjective time. 3 seconds real. The sensor data says it ran 12 seconds real, and extrapolating the compression curve honestly, that means somewhere in the range of 10,000 subjective years." Tsunade did not laugh. She had spent 50 years around shinobi capable of things that broke ordinary physics into pieces small enough to fit in a jutsu scroll. And she had learned, decades ago, to treat every impossible number as a diagnosis waiting for a body to confirm it, rather than a joke waiting to be dismissed. "Bring him to the hospital," she said, quietly. "I don't want an escort of Ambiyu making a parade out of it. I want him in an examination room before anyone else decides they've got a stake in what he is." The examination took 3 hours, and at the end of it, Tsunade sat across a metal table from a boy whose vitals read like a training manual's idea of perfect health, and whose chakra signature, under the specific diagnostic technique she had spent 30 years refining, read like nothing she had ever charted in the living body. Your reserves, she said, tapping the readout scroll spread across the table between them, are roughly 40 times what they were the last time anyone checked. Your seal is intact. Better than intact, actually. It's reinforced along every stress point I'd expect chakra of that volume to eventually crack. Somebody in there has been doing maintenance work on Konoha's finest sealing craftsmanship for a very long time, and doing it better than the man who built it. Naruto sat with his hands folded on the table's edge, watching her the way he watched most things now, without impatience. Kurama helped, he said. Mostly he complained the whole time, but he helped. 10,000 years. Tsunade said the number out loud, testing its weight the way a woman tests a stone bridge before trusting her full weight to it. That's the figure Shikamaru's sensor math landed on. You want to confirm or deny that for me before I write it into a medical file that a dozen people above my rank are going to want to read. Confirm. You don't sound like someone who spent 10,000 years anywhere. I don't have anything left to sound like. He said it without bitterness, a fact stated flatly, the way a man reports the weather. The version of me you'd expect to sound scared, or angry, or however you want a kid to sound after something like that. He's still in here somewhere. I kept the part of him that wants ramen. I couldn't keep the volume. Tsunade watched him for a long moment, and something in her expression, hardened by decades of medical practice on bodies that had survived things, bodies weren't built to survive, did not soften so much as steady into something closer to respect than pity. There's a second signature in your chakra network, she said, underneath Kurama's. It doesn't behave like Biju chakra. It doesn't behave like anything I've got a name for. It reads almost like a standing army compressed down into a single carrier wave, if that sentence means anything to you. It means exactly what you think it means. Then I need you to tell me plainly before I walk out of this room and someone starts asking me for a threat assessment, Tsunade said, leaning forward, voice dropping into the register she reserved for questions that mattered more than any diagnosis. Is it going to hurt this village? Naruto held her gaze without blinking, and for one long moment, the room's temperature did not change, and no visible chakra stirred, but something underneath the floorboards, something under every floorboard within a mile of that examination table, went very still and very attentive, the way a dog goes still when it hears its name spoken, in a tone it does not recognize. Only if this village decides it wants to find out the hard way, he said. I'm not going to start anything, Bachan. I never wanted to start anything. I just don't think I know how to stop finishing things anymore. Tsunade sat back slowly. It was not the answer of a monster. It was also, unmistakably, not the answer of the boy who used to shout his ambitions loud enough to rattle windows 2 streets over, and she understood, sitting across that table, that the village she had just agreed to lead had come home from a 2-week mission carrying a problem that no amount of institutional experience had prepared her to solve. Shikamaru's report reached the full council chamber 4 hours after Naruto's medical examination concluded, and by then the number in it had stopped being a curiosity and started being a mandate. 10,000 years is not a rounding error, Homura said, reading the final figure aloud for the benefit of the room, though everyone present had already read it privately at least twice. It is not a translation issue in the sensor equipment. Tsunade-sama's own examination confirms the chakra architecture is fundamentally altered, permanently, in ways this village has no prior framework for managing. He's 12 years old, Kakashi said, from the far side of the table, his voice carrying none of its usual laziness. He came home. He asked for ramen. He hasn't heard anyone since the bridge, except the man who was trying to garrote him in his sleep. That is precisely the concern. Koharu's hands were folded in front of her with the specific stillness of someone who had already made a decision and was merely walking the room through the reasoning that justified it. A boy who has endured 10 millennia of psychological accumulation and returns capable of speech, of ordinary requests, of appearing entirely unaffected on the surface, is not evidence of stability. It is evidence of containment we do not understand and therefore cannot trust. So your solution is to contain what's already contained itself for 10,000 years, Kakashi said flat. Our solution, Homura said, is to ensure that whatever he is does not decide, at some point when this village least expects it, that it prefers a different arrangement. He looked around the table, gauging the room the way a man gauges weather before committing to a course. A quiet examination under controlled conditions. Sealing specialist present in case a secondary containment measure proves necessary. If he cooperates, this ends in an afternoon and nobody outside this room ever needs to know it happened. And if he doesn't cooperate, Homura's gaze did not waver. Then we will already have learned what we needed to learn. Kakashi did not respond to that immediately because there was nothing to say to it that would not sound like begging. And begging in this room had never once changed a decision the elders had already priced into their calculations before the meeting started. Sitting 3 seats down, saying nothing. The anonymous figure who had spoken to Homura and Koharu the previous night made a small note on a slip of paper and passed it, without ceremony, to a runner waiting just outside the chamber door. Shikamaru learned about the operation 40 minutes before it launched, not because anyone briefed him, but because the standing order to reposition route surveillance teams near a specific district apartment complex crossed his desk for logistical clearance, and he recognized the address as the one listed on Naruto's registered residence. He sat with the order in front of him for exactly as long as it took to confirm he was reading it correctly, and then he did something that violated at least 4 regulations he could name off the top of his head without trying. He got up, walked to the mission desk, and requisitioned a Jonin-grade communication scroll under Azuma's clearance code, forged with a confidence that surprised even him less than it should have, and sent a single line to the sensor outpost nearest the target district. Advised civilian evacuation of surrounding block. Training exercise. Authorization pending. It would buy, he calculated, maybe 10 minutes before someone above his rank noticed the irregularity and shut it down. It was not enough time to stop anything. It was enough time, he hoped, to reduce how many ordinary people were standing close enough to whatever was about to happen to end up as collateral in it. You're going to get burned for this, Asuma said, appearing at his shoulder, having read the scroll's contents off the desk before Shikamaru could stop him. Probably. You could have just come to me first. There wasn't time to argue about whether we should be doing anything, Shikamaru said, already moving toward the door, jaw tight, voice clipped down to the bare functional minimum a man uses when he has decided a course of action and does not intend to spend energy defending it. There's a kid about to have 4 root operatives try to bag him in his own apartment, and I've seen enough sensor curbs on what's living in that kid's chakra network to know exactly how badly this is going to go if he decides he doesn't feel like being cooperative about it. Naruto's apartment held a specific smell of dust that accumulates in a place its owner has not slept in for weeks, and he stood in the middle of it now, alone, having sent Haruka home an hour earlier with a promise of ramen tomorrow that he intended, with the same flat certainty he applied to every promise now, to keep. He felt them before they moved. 4 presences, positioned at the room's cardinal points outside the walls, chakras depressed down to the specific low hum that root operatives trained into their bones from childhood, a discipline built to be invisible to ordinary shinobi senses. It was not invisible to whatever now lived beneath Naruto's skin. They're not here to talk, Kurama said. Unnecessary. A formality between them at this point rather than information. I know. 4 operatives, containment-grade sealing tags on all of them, and a 5th, further back, holding a scroll heavy enough to be a full binding array. This isn't a conversation kit. This is an extraction. I know that too. The window shattered inward first, a suppression tag already sailing through the gap before the glass finished falling. Designed to blanket the room in a chakra null field before its target could react. It hit the floor and detonated its seal exactly on schedule. Nothing happened. Not because the tag failed. The tag functioned precisely as designed, flooding the room with a field that should have severed any shinobi's access to their own chakra network for a full 90 seconds. It simply had nothing to sever. What answered the 4 root operatives converging through the broken window, and the door was not a chakra network drawing on a vessel. It was something that had already stopped needing that particular architecture roughly 9,000 years ago. The first operative came through the door in a blur meant to close distance before Naruto could orient. He never reached him. A shape rose out of the shadow. The broken window's moonlight threw across the floor, silent, without ceremony. And the operative's momentum simply stopped, arrested mid-stride the way a wave stops against a wall it did not know was there, and he crumpled without a mark on him. Chakra pathways sealed shut from the inside by something that had learned, across 10 millennia, exactly how much force a body could absorb before it stopped being worth all. The second and third came from opposite walls in the same breath. Coordinated, professional, the kind of pincer maneuver that had ended 100 lesser targets before this one. Naruto did not move from where he stood in the center of the room. He did not need to. The dark pool at his feet answered for him, rising in 2 separate shapes that met each attacker before either blade could clear its sheath, and both men went down without a sound. Breath knocked from their lungs, consciousness taken from them with the same economy Naruto had once used to end a training dummy's afternoon. He could have killed all 3. He understood that. Standing in the wreckage of his own front room with the same flat clarity, he understood everything now. It would have cost him nothing. It would have taken less effort than the restraint currently required to keep 3 men breathing on his floor instead of not breathing at all. The 4th operative, the one holding the binding scroll, hesitated in the doorway. Chakra reserves already calculating the math of an engagement his training told him he should have won 3 moves ago. Put it down, Naruto said. His voice carried no threat in it, no theater, only the specific weight of a fact that did not require repeating twice. You're going to walk out of here. All 4 of you. I want that a lot more than I want to hurt anyone tonight. The operative's hand did not move toward the scroll's release seal. It did not move away from it either. Kill him, Kurama said, low, almost bored. You've spared 3. That's already more mercy than this village has earned tonight. No. The operative's shoulders tensed, reading the silence between the 2 voices as an opening, and moved. He was on the floor before the motion finished, not dead, not maimed, simply pinned by a weight that came from nowhere visible and pressed down against his chest with the exact, calibrated pressure required to keep a trained shinobi from drawing another breath deep enough to finish a jutsu. Naruto crossed the room without hurry, crouched beside him, and lifted the binding scroll out of his slack hand with 2 fingers. I want you to tell whoever sent you something, Naruto said, quiet, close enough that the operative's ragged breathing was the loudest sound in the room. I'm not a weapon this village gets to point somewhere convenient. I'm not a monster you get to bury under a mountain because the paperwork's easier that way. I came home because there's still a part of me that wants to. That part's the only reason any of you are walking out of this room tonight instead of getting carried out of it." He straightened, and the pressure on the operative's chest lifted as smoothly as it had arrived. "Go," he said. The 4 root operatives did not need to be told twice. They gathered themselves off the floor with the specific, unsteady haste of professionals who had just failed the only mission of their careers that mattered and understood, in the marrow of that failure, exactly how much worse it could have gone. Shikamaru arrived through the broken window 40 seconds later, chest heaving from a dead run across half the district, and found the room empty of anyone but Naruto standing in its center. Apartment wrecked. 4 unconscious men's chakra signatures, already fading into the dark beyond the district's edge, and no blood anywhere on the floor at all. "You're late," Naruto said, without turning around. Shikamaru's eyes moved across the room once, cataloging the shattered window, the door hanging off one hinge, the specific absence of bodies where his sensor data had told him 4 highly trained operatives should be lying dead. His breathing slowed by increments, the tactical part of his brain already running the math on what he was looking at and disliking every conclusion it produced. "You didn't kill them," he said finally. "No. Why not?" It was not an accusation. It came out closer to genuine confusion, the specific dry disbelief of a man who had spent his life calculating the most efficient outcome of every engagement and had just watched someone with every justification and every capability decline the efficient one entirely. Naruto turned to face him, and for the first time since the bridge, something in his expression cracked open far enough for Shikamaru to see, briefly, the specific shape of the boy who used to shout across training grounds and mean every word of it. "Because I spent 10,000 years learning exactly how much killing does or doesn't fix," he said, "and I already know the answer. It doesn't fix anything, Shikamaru. It just adds another number to a count I stopped keeping a long time ago." He looked at the wrecked window, at the moonlight coming through it, at a village that had just tried to bag him in his own home the same night he had walked back through its gates. "I want to be somebody this village can trust without needing a leash. I can't do that if the first thing I do coming home is start a count of my own." Shikamaru did not have an answer for that. He stood in the broken doorway of a boy's apartment with a report folded in his flak jacket that had already cost him his career if the wrong person traced the forged evacuation order back to him, and understood, standing there, that the number in that report had not been the most dangerous thing he learned that night. The most dangerous thing was that whatever Naruto had become, it still, apparently, cared more about being trusted than about being feared. And Shikamaru, doing the math the way he did the math on everything, understood that a village smart enough to recognize that as a gift instead of a weakness might have just been handed the safest ally it would ever have. He was less confident the village currently in charge of that decision was smart enough to see it that way. The message reached Itachi 3 days later, delivered by no messenger at all. He and Kisame had made camp in the ruins of an old watchtower 200 miles from the border, the kind of half-collapsed structure that offered cover without offering comfort, and Itachi had been sitting alone at its highest remaining ledge, staring out at nothing in particular, when the shadow at the base of the wall lengthened past what the moonlight should have allowed and resolved, without fanfare, into a shape he recognized immediately, despite having never seen it stand quite this before. Naruto did not announce himself. He simply stood there, at the edge of the ledge's light, and Itachi understood, with the specific clinical dread of a man recognizing a variable he had failed to account for reasserting itself, that this was not a physical presence at all, that whatever stood before him was a projection cast across a distance no jutsu he had ever studied could bridge, carried on the same substance that had answered a garrote in a dark camp and pinned 4 root operatives to a floor without drawing a single drop of blood. "I wondered if you'd come," Itachi said. His voice held its usual measured calm, though something underneath it, some fraction of the composure that had defined every prior encounter between them, did not sit quite as steady as it once had. "I'm not here to kill you." Naruto's voice carried across the distance without volume, without heat, a fact stated the way facts were always stated now. "I thought about it. I had 10,000 years to think about it, actually. I decided against it more times than I can count." "Why?" "Because you didn't mean it to happen this way." Naruto's shape did not move, did not gesture, held the specific stillness of a throne rather than a body standing on uneven stone. "You built something to be a mercy. It broke on something you couldn't have accounted for. That's not the same as cruelty. Even if it cost me everything, cruelty would have cost me anyway." Itachi was quiet for a long moment, the wind moving to the tower's broken stone the only sound between them. "I have killed a great many people," he said finally, "in service of calculations I believed were correct. I have never, before this, watched a calculation fail this completely and still walk away from the wreckage myself." He looked at the shape standing at the edge of his firelight, and something in his composure, rigid and clinical through 100 prior confrontations, thinned to something almost bare. "What did I take from you?" "Everything loud." Naruto's answer came without hesitation, without theater, the specific honesty of a man who had stopped protecting people from the truth of his own condition, somewhere around year 3000. "Everything that used to make noise before it thought. I kept the parts underneath that, the parts that wanted to come home, the parts that still want ramen. But the noise is gone, Itachi. I don't think it's coming back. I am sorry." It was the second time he had said it, and this time it carried none of the clinical distance the first apology on the bridge had carried. It landed, plain and unadorned, the closest thing to penance a man like Itachi Uchiha had left to offer. I know. Naruto's shape did not soften, did not harden either. Held steady in the same register it had held since the projection first resolved. I'm not going to forgive you for it. I don't think forgiveness is a thing I have room for anymore, not the way I used to understand it. But I'm not going to hunt you for it either. What happened, happened. I survived it. That's the only accounting either of us gets to make. Kisame's voice carried up from below, tense, alert to a presence he could sense but not locate. Itachi. What is that? An old debt, Itachi answered, without looking away from the shape at the ledge's edge, settling itself without collection. Naruto's projection held for one more moment, long enough for something in his expression, distant and half-formed across the strange medium carrying it, to shift into something that might, in a person who still had the vocabulary for it, have resembled sorrow rather than judgment. Don't use that technique again, he said. Not on anyone. You don't have the control you think you do. I'm proof of that. Then the shadow thinned back into ordinary dark, and the ledge held only Itachi Uchiha, alone, staring at a fire that had burned lower than he remembered leaving it, carrying a weight that no amount of clinical distance was ever going to fully set down again. Konoha's council convened one final time on the matter, 3 days after the failed operation, and this session lasted considerably less time than the one that had authorized it. The operation failed, Homura said, flat, reading a report that 4 different root operatives had independently corroborated under separate interrogation, each account matching the others down to the smallest detail. It failed because the target had every capability required to end all 4 operatives permanently and chose, deliberately, not to exercise it. That is not evidence of restraint, Koharu said. That is evidence of a message being sent. He wants us to understand exactly how much control he currently exercises over whether this village continues functioning at all. Perhaps. Homura set the report down, and for the first time in the entire proceeding, something in his voice carried the specific wariness of a man recalculating a strategy he had believed, until 3 days ago, was unassailable. Or perhaps it is evidence that whatever the boy became in that technique's failure, it retains something this village would be catastrophically foolish to discard out of paranoia. A weapon of that magnitude who chooses mercy without being asked to is not a liability to be contained. It is the single greatest asset this village will ever be handed, provided we do not spend it forcing him to decide we are not worth protecting. Kakashi, sitting at the table's far end, said nothing, though something in his posture eased by a fraction he had not realized he was carrying. The root operation is to be discontinued, Homura said, and the finality in his voice left no room for Koharu's continued objections to gain any traction. Effective immediately. Any further surveillance of the boy is to be conducted through ordinary Jonin oversight channels, transparent and disclosed. We will not repeat this mistake a second time. Whatever else Naruto Uzumaki has become, he has already demonstrated more restraint than this council did in authorizing his containment. That is not a lesson this village can afford to ignore twice. It was, by the flat institutional standards of a room built on cold paranoia rather than warmth, the closest thing to an apology Konoha's ruling body would ever offer him. Nobody in that room expected Naruto to know it had happened at all. Most of them privately hoped he never would. Ichiraku's stand smelled the same way it had smelled every single time Naruto had walked up to it, across 12 years of ordinary childhood, and that smell, steam and salt and broth, simmering low behind the counter, reached him half a block before the stand itself came into view. Tucci looked up from the counter as the stool creaked under a weight settling onto it, and his face split into the specific, uncomplicated grin of a man who had fed this particular customer more bowls than he could reasonably count, and had missed the noise that usually came with him. There he is, Tucci said. Word's been going around you had yourself a rough couple weeks out there. Something like that. Naruto set both hands flat on the counter, and something in the gesture, small and ordinary, carried more weight than anything he had said across the entire length of the road home. The usual. X-report if you got it. Always got it for you. Tucci turned to the pot, ladling broth with the same practiced economy he had used 10,000 years ago in a memory that no longer felt like it belonged to the same world as this counter. You look tired, kid. You want to talk about it? Naruto watched steam rise off the broth as it settled into the bowl in front of him, and beneath the stool, beneath the street, beneath the entire district, and further out than that, an army with no visible edge stood in patient, silent ranks in a dark no ordinary eye could see, waiting on a word he had no intention of ever giving them here. Maybe someday, he said, not tonight. Iruka slid onto the stool beside him without being asked, ordering his own bowl with the specific casual ease of a man determined to make this feel exactly as unremarkable as it had ever felt before, and for a while neither of them said anything at all, letting the noise of the street fill the silence the way it always had, motorbikes and vendors and children shouting somewhere down the block over a game that did not matter to anyone outside it. You okay? Iruka asked eventually, quiet, not pushing. Naruto lifted the first bite to his mouth, and the taste hit him the way it always had, warm and simple and entirely undeserving of the 10,000 years it had taken him to earn the right to taste it again. I don't know yet, he said, and it was, for the first time since the bridge, an honest answer rather than a load-bearing one. But I'm here. That's more than I thought I'd get for a long time. Iruka's hand found his shoulder again, the same gesture worn smooth from repetition, warm and steady against a weight the world had no name for yet. And Naruto let it rest there, unmoving, unafraid, a god with an army of the dead standing silent at his feet and a bowl of ramen steaming in front of him, wanting, with everything that 10,000 years had failed to burn out of him, exactly this and nothing more.